In his absence, I have been defeated by a number of infidel cowherd men while I was guarding the bodies of all the wives of Krishna.
There's a purport?
There's a purport. The important point in this verse is how it was possible that Arjuna could be defeated by a gang of ignoble cowherd men, and how such mundane cowherd men could touch the bodies of the wives of Lord Krishna, who were under the protection of Arjuna. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has justified the contradiction by research in the Vishnu Purana and Brahma Purana. In these Puranas it is said that once the fair denizens of heaven pleased Astavakra Muni by their service and were blessed by the Muni to have the Supreme Lord as their husband. Astavakra Muni was curved in 8 joints of his body, and thus he used to move in a peculiar curved manner. The daughters of the demigods could not check their laughter upon seeing the movements of the Muni, and the Muni, being angry at them, cursed them that they would be kidnapped by rogues, even if they would get the Lord as their husband. Later on, the girls again satisfied the Muni by their prayers, and the Muni blessed them that they would regain their husband even after being robbed by the rogues. So, in order to keep the words of the great Muni, the Lord himself kidnapped his wives from the protection of Arjuna. Otherwise, they would have at once vanished from the scene as soon as they were touched by the rogues. Besides that, some of the gopis who prayed to become wives of the Lord returned to their respective positions after their desire was fulfilled. After the departure of Lord Krishna, he wanted all his entourage back to Godhead, and they were called back under different conditions only.
Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chaksuru Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Hukam Karati Vachalam Pangolangayati Girim Yakrapa Tamaham Vande Siguru Dinatarinam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Shamini Tinamani Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschachara Satamine Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Vanchakalpatrubhischa Kapasandhyavecha Titanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. O Emperor, now I am separated from my friend and dearmost well-wisher, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore my heart appears to be void of everything. In his absence, I have been defeated by a number of infidel cowherd men while I was guarding the bodies of all the wives of Krishna. So, in the purport, Prabhupada quotes Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur saying that there was an arrangement for Krishna's wives, these ladies, to go back to Godhead. And he relates the story that they laughed at Ashtavakra. Ashta means 8. So he was somewhat handicapped in 8 places. And when they saw him, they laughed at him. And he didn't like that, and he cursed them. So that's the transcendental understanding behind this scene. And they were cursed, they would be kidnapped. And anyway, so, but there's the other example that we give in terms of Arjuna losing his power because he lost his connection with Krishna. And Arjuna was known as the greatest warrior. There was no one as powerful as Arjuna. So this is very strange that he could be defeated by some men who had really no strength. Right? And so it shows the power of connection with Krishna And that power is not our power, but it's Krishna's power. Otherwise, how could such a powerful person as Arjuna become powerless? Doesn't make any sense, does it? Because it seems if you have power, you have it, and if you don't have it, you don't have it, right? And here he had it, and now he doesn't have it. Or you could not have it, and you can get it. So, a devotee, a Vaishnava, they never think they have power. That's their humility. Even though they're doing something powerful, they think, it's not my power, I'm not powerful. And when you identify your power as your own, then in a sense you could say it's a kind of Mayavad idea, although not perfectly Mayavad, but identifying Krishna's power as your power. It becomes a form of misidentification, that God's power is my power, so I am like God in that sense. When Prabhupada was asked, or Prabhupada was told that you've done wonderful things in spreading Krishna consciousness around the world, he denied it. And that seems strange because he actually did it. And no one did what Prabhupada did. I mean, objectively, externally, you can codify what Prabhupada did. On this date he arrived, on this date he incorporated, on this date temple was opened, on this date people joined, on this date he gave Bhagavad Gita, on this date books were published, this date the next temple was opened. And then 12 years after Prabhupada arrived, there were 108 temples, 5,000 initiated devotees, and an infrastructure to spread Krishna consciousness all around the world. No one had ever done that before in the history of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So, for Prabhupada to say, I haven't done anything wonderful, seems a huge contradiction, when in fact he did something more wonderful than even the Lord himself did, than even his own spiritual master did, at least externally. Isn't it? And Prabhupada would sometimes say that, I want my disciples to do more than me, and that my disciples can do more than me. Now Prabhupada had 5,000 disciples, Japtak Maharaj has 40,000. So in that sense he did more than his own spiritual master. Of course he'll never think I'm more, but Prabhupada never thought he was more than Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta wanted Krishna consciousness spread around the world, and it didn't happen during his lifetime. So objectively, Prabhupada did something very wonderful, and Prabhupada said, and this is a quote, people say I've done something wonderful, but I don't know that I've done anything wonderful. And then he said, but if you say I've done something wonderful, then the wonderful thing is that I've followed the order of my Guru. And so then all credit was given to his Guru, that he has done something wonderful. And it wasn't me, it was him. So this is the definition of humility, that you may do something wonderful, but you don't think it's you that did it. And the definition of pride is that you think it's you, even though it's Krishna's power. And the understanding is that if you don't have this, that means if you identify with this power and you think it's yours, then Krishna can take it away from you at any moment. As here Arjuna lost his power. So this is a good example. Going from the most powerful warrior on the planet to not even be able to defeat some cowherd men. Cowherd men are not kshatriyas. They're not big, rough, tough men. They're not trained to fight, and he couldn't defeat them. That's amazing, isn't it? Krishna can do two things opposite. He can make you do something you're not qualified to do, and he can take away the ability that you're qualified to have. He could take away your natural ability for things you're qualified to do, so you can't do them, and he can give you ability to do things you can't do, depending on your attitude and your faith. The way Prabhupada established Krishna consciousness was that he asked very young devotees to do things which they didn't really feel qualified to do. And he encouraged them to do, not on the basis of their own ability, but on the power of Krishna consciousness. And the other thing that Prabhupada said was, when you're successful, don't become proud, because if you do, everything will be finished. So that's the opposite side. Do this, Krishna Shakti Vina Nahi Tara Pavartana. If you get Krishna Shakti, you'll be successful. If you don't get it, without it, you can't do it. Just on material ability. Now some people have material ability and then they think they'll be successful as devotees with material ability. You may be successful at doing something, but you won't be successful at changing the hearts of other people. That takes purity. That takes Krishna Shakti. That's the power that spreads Krishna consciousness. It's not a material power. So if you have material power and you think you're special because you have material power, then you're in a dangerous situation. And Krishna, at some point, may take that away and may feel that I don't want you as a preacher or as a leader in the Krishna conscious movement, because you're not manifesting Krishna Shakti, but you're manifesting your own material ability, and you think that's sufficient. And that doesn't change people's hearts. So you may be very good at many things, but that will not change hearts. Just like we know Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, how do you evaluate a Vaishnava? Well, you evaluate him by his ability to change hearts. By his presence, he makes other people devotees. That's Krishna Shakti. That's his purity coming through. And that's the power, isn't it? And sometimes you might think the power is, well, I'll study Shastra and I'll become expert. And that's part of it, and that's important, and it's necessary. But if the person who knows the Shastra is not living it, it doesn't have the power. So I can say something, you can say something, doesn't mean it will affect people the same way. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada said something which is kind of interesting to meditate on. He said that the presence of the spiritual master is so powerful that he can make disciples just by his smile. Any of you read that? It's in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Now, that appears to go against everything Prabhupada said about Guru, because what did Prabhupada always say? It's not that the Guru touches you and you get a shock, but you hear. And how do you know a fool? You know when he opens his mouth. And how do you know a Guru? When he speaks from parampara, and his words penetrate your heart. So that's the standard understanding. But Prabhupada's making this point that when you have Krishna Shakti, even if you don't speak, your presence will affect the heart of so many devotees. And you just try to understand, when Prabhupada was beginning the Krishna consciousness movement, there was no Sangha, or very little Sangha. So when people came, they weren't getting very good association, if they even got any association. So it was Prabhupada's presence, just the power of who he was, that was affecting people. Not only what he was saying, but people seeing him and their hearts changing. So that's that we should always understand, that the essence of spreading Krishna consciousness is the power that Krishna gives to the pure devotee. And Krishna will give that to anyone who's purely following the pure devotee, because they need to have that to spread Krishna consciousness. Just like some of you are distributing books, and sometimes you experience this on book distribution, that sometimes you feel the power flowing through you to such a degree that it almost really doesn't matter what you say anymore, because anything you say in that consciousness will affect people. You have that experience? When you're in the zone, we might call it in the zone, or in modern language, in the flow, that you're experiencing so much happiness by giving people Krishna. You're so blissful and you're so energized that when you go up to people, immediately they feel that energy and they become happy. And they become inspired themselves. They don't even know why, but they're meeting someone who's very inspired. When we began distributing big books, one of the devotees who was leading us was so inspired that it really didn't matter what he said, but people just were mesmerized by his ecstasy. And one time he sold a Krishna book to an atheist. So I said, "What did you tell them?" Because we were just beginning to distribute books and we didn't really know how to do it. And he was leading in book distribution, so I would ask him, "Well, what are you saying?" And he said, "I met an atheist and I told him, I am in ecstasy. Take this book." And that's all he said, and they took it. And they could see and they could feel that ecstasy. So, obviously, if you went up to someone with a Krishna book and said, "Hi, I'm in ecstasy, take the book," it's not going to work. Because obviously you're not in ecstasy. You're thinking, "I'm tired, I'm hungry, I don't want to do this." So Krishna Shakti is not flowing through you. And so then you might inquire, you might wonder, from a objective perspective, how could people who were young devotees and didn't know much about Krishna and had never been to India, didn't have the sangha of senior devotees like we do now, were hearing katha on a very, very basic level. Basically, every class was the same. You're not the body, you're spirit, soul, you're servant of Krishna. That's all we really knew, and that's all we were really hearing. So we weren't hearing a high level of katha. Our kirtans were not very rasik. There was no rasik discussion. The senior devotees were like a year and a half. How could, in that, and there were only 500 of us around the world, so how, and we didn't know much. How could, in that environment, we spread Krishna consciousness? Doesn't make sense externally, if you wanted to do a PhD on it. But as Mukunda Prabhu was nicely explaining last night, when your first understanding or taste or experience of love is when you meet your spiritual master. So the love that devotees had for Prabhupada was, as one devotee wrote in his poetry of Vyasa Puja offering, "You've been loved, you are loved like no one has ever been loved before." That love was so intense. And that love meant that we wanted to fulfill that mission, and Prabhupada gave us a mission. Here are my books, distribute them. Here are the conditioned souls, open temples for them to come to, do programs. And with that order, with that desire, what happened? Krishna then descended in the form of Krishna Shakti, and then he empowered devotees to fulfill that desire. And it wasn't a question of how much they knew. And in there, I've told the story many times, it's quite interesting, and it'll help you understand the context of the movement. When I first was getting into Krishna consciousness, the movement was still young. And temples had maybe 10 devotees on the average, some less, some more. The big temples had like 30, 35. Those were like Los Angeles. So I had gone to Los Angeles after I decided to become a devotee to see my parents for Christmas. And so I went to the temple and I invited some friends. And so we went, and it was very ecstatic. The energy was very high at the temple. And then the next morning I decided I would go back. And I called my friend and I said, "You want to come back?" He said, "No, I'm not going back. There's no way I'm going back." And I said, "Why? What happened?" He said, "If I go back, I'll join. I'll never leave." This is somebody who never been to a temple, didn't know about Krishna consciousness, went for 2 hours and was afraid to go back because he knew if he went back he would join. Why? Because the devotees were so inspired that in that atmosphere people were walking into the temple and becoming devotees. Not so much because of what we knew, but because of what we were feeling. Brand new devotees feeling this desire to please Prabhupada, and the kirtans were amazing. Not Bengali, not this or that, just extremely enthusiastic devotees trying to please Prabhupada. So, in that atmosphere of devotees trying to please Prabhupada, the Shakti came down. I have a godbrother, he was sent to Australia. He'd been a devotee 6 months, he was sent to be the temple president. How can you be a temple president 6 months? He said, I knew so little about Bhagavad Gita. In some of the classes, I would just talk about what I used to do before I was a devotee. You know, how I became a devotee. I didn't even know enough to really give a class every day. How could a person like that establish the foundation for spreading Krishna consciousness? Because we understood clearly it wasn't us. That was so obvious to us because we could have never done this if it were us. Because we were too young to even think, to even become proud that it's us. Now we can become proud, because I know so many shlokas, I know so much shastra. I've been a devotee for decades. I've had the association of so many sadhus. Now I can become proud. Our fortune then was we didn't really have anything to be proud of. Now some of us still became proud, but proud of our material ability. But spiritually, we didn't have much to be proud of, or we could be proud only relative to another. I know 10 shlokas, you know 5, I'm better than you. Maybe that much pride could be there. But in terms of spreading Krishna consciousness around the world, we did feel quite unqualified. And that became our qualification. And then Krishna used us. And we did wonderful things. You know, you ever hear that saying, just get out of the way? You're called to do something, be an instrument, get out of the way, don't let the ego get in the way, just let it flow through you. So that was the mood, just let it flow through you. Here's the instruction, and let that instruction flow through you. That was the idea. So, we had devotees doing amazing things, they were making many devotees. I don't know if you're aware of this, but temples that now have 10 devotees, when Prabhupada left, had 150. Temples that now have 50 had 500. Temples that have, like when Prabhupada left, I think Los Angeles had 350 devotees. San Diego, I don't know if you've been to these temples. San Diego, 65. Montreal, 150. San Francisco, I don't know. You know, large numbers of devotees.
Detroit, 250.
Yeah, Detroit, 250. There's some outrageous number. We're talking about living in the temple, or right around the temple. So, there was obviously an empowerment that we were very young devotees were making devotees. We were obviously empowered. And then we had the opposite phenomena happen. It happened a little bit during Prabhupada's time, but it happened later, where some devotees became proud of their position, that this is, by my power I'm doing this. And at some point Krishna said, that's it, you're out. And just said, okay, it's time for someone else to step in who was humble enough to take the position. And some of our biggest leaders lost their Shakti. Sannyasis gave up their sannyas, took ordinary jobs. From their respectable position, one of them was pumping gas at a gas station. You know, people are honoring him, and now we just lost everything. Some of our gurus also. So we've had examples before us, and when we have these examples, we're supposed to learn that even a young devotee can do something amazing. And even a very advanced devotee, or so-called advanced, when they become proud, Krishna could say, okay, I'm pulling the plug. And now you can't even follow the four-legged principles. Isn't that amazing? So, we should never become proud. The Prabhupada once begged his leaders, don't become proud. He was actually crying. He said, please, whatever, do not become puffed up. That was Prabhupada understood that would destroy everything. And then you see something that was very difficult for us to understand as young devotees. It was difficult to understand the humility of advanced Vaishnavas, when the Vaishnava who's very qualified feels unqualified. So we would imitate that, because we didn't understand it. No, Prabhu, you're very great, I'm nothing, I'm just a worm and stool. We didn't feel like a worm and stool, and we didn't really think you were that great. But we thought that's what we're supposed to do, because that's what the acharyas do. But we didn't understand it. And we're still trying to understand what it means to do something great but feel like I'm not great. Still trying to understand that. One devotee told me a story that he was in I think Ukraine. For many years he was the #1 book distributor, and at some point he became proud. And he told me that at that point, when pride hit a certain threshold, he was not able to distribute one book. Krishna would not let him distribute even one book in the entire day. Isn't that amazing? The #1 book distributor for years could no longer, it was just like Arjuna. It was the same thing. It was just like, I can't even defeat some cowherd men. I can't even distribute one book, and I'm the biggest book distributor for years. Is that amazing? So, sometimes, by the grace of Krishna, we can do something amazingly wonderful. And we always have to remember, at any moment, Krishna could pull the plug. Mukam karoti vachalam pagulangayate yakkapatamaham pandit siguru dinataya. If you're dumb, you can speak poetry. If you're lame, you can climb mountains. If you're blind, you can see stars in the sky. By the mercy of Mahaprabhu, by the mercy of the Guru. And if they pull the plug, you might be the greatest speaker in the world and you'll just be mumbling. So we should always be conscious and grateful that whenever we're successful, that's Krishna Kripa. That's just mercy. That's all it is. I can speak something wonderful, I can sing something wonderful, I can do something wonderful. I can understand anything, that's also mercy. And pride, it does not please Krishna. It actually disturbs his heart. Krishna's heart is melted by the humble devotee. But when the devotee becomes proud, Krishna just... So many leelas in Chaitanya Charitamrita, when a devotee or practitioner becomes proud, Mahaprabhu just ignores them. And when a devotee becomes humble, he gets the mercy of Mahaprabhu. Like Maharaj Prataparudra. He got the mercy because he swept the street. Sanatana Goswami, when he came humbly begging to Mahaprabhu, Mahaprabhu said, your humility is too much, stop it, I can't deal with it. It was just, his heart was just melting. Like, stop it, my heart is like, I can't, you understand? Like, sometimes love is so strong, you just stop it, you're driving me crazy with your love. Your humility is driving me crazy, stop it, I can't deal with it. So, can we understand that humility is so pleasing to Krishna? And then the other understanding is that if a devotee is not humble, Krishna cannot trust him to give him that power. Because if I give you the power and you're not humble, you could misuse it for your own gratification to exploit others. So why should I give it to you? Why should I give you money if I don't trust you that you can spend it properly? So Krishna's Shakti, his power to spread Krishna consciousness is like money. And so Krishna's looking, who can I give it to? And Prabhupada once said, Krishna consciousness will spread around the world. And if you stay in the movement, then you'll get credit for doing it. He said he'll need people and he'll choose the people who are willing to do it. So if you stay and willingly do it, he'll use you and you'll get the credit. So he did it, but he'll give you the credit because you were willing to do it. With you or without you, he said it'll spread, but if you stay, you get the credit. Because somebody has to do it, right? So if you're around and willing, he can choose you. Yes? So, Krishna's Shakti is like money. Who's Krishna going to give that money to? The one he trusts. And the more he trusts, the more he'll give. The more he'll give that power, right? And the more you want to use that power for his service, and pray, Krishna, empower me to do your service. The more he's willing to give it, as long as you don't identify with it, and you remain in that position that you understand, this is Krishna. Oh, Prabhu, that was a nice kirtan. What do you think? Yes, I know how to do kirtan. I'm the man. No. Think, this is Krishna's mercy that I could sing. If you say I sing nice, it's Krishna's mercy, because if he takes it away, I'll be like a croaking frog. Isn't it? You ever feel like that? You do something well and you think, oh, Krishna, if he doesn't like what I'm doing, he could take it away and I won't be able to sing, I won't be able to speak, I won't be able to do anything. Now, some devotees say that 40 years ago, they were doing things that even today they're unable to do. Being empowered by Prabhupada. And being so dedicated, they can't even understand how as a young devotee they did that. Because it wasn't them, it was Krishna. So, a lot of times we'll ask devotees to do something which is out of their comfort zone. And they'll respond and say, I can't do that, it's too difficult. Because they're not realizing that it's not them that's going to do it. That's Krishna Shakti going to do it. And that's how we expand our service. Prabhu, can you do this? No, I'm not qualified. Perfect. You're the person to do it because you realize you're not qualified. That's your qualification. But we think the fact that I'm not qualified is my lack of qualification, when in most cases it is your qualification. Prabhu, Prabhupada said he wants all of us to be guru. Can you be guru? Oh, no way. It's not possible. But he asks you to do it. All of us, Siksha or Diksha Guru. So how will I do it? When I realize I can't do it, that's my qualification. And that's when I'm ready to do it. Isn't it? That's a qualification for being Guru. To realize I'm not qualified. And if I can represent my Guru and Parampara and follow them, that's my qualification. So there's so many things that Prabhupada asks us to do that we're not qualified to do. But we didn't shy away from doing them because we knew he would give qualification. When I was temple president, Prabhupada said, you should think you're not qualified to do this job. The next sentence was, therefore you're fired. No. Well, if I think I'm not qualified, then I would assume the next sentence is, or you should understand you're not qualified to do this job, therefore we're removing you. No. The next sentence was, you should think you're not qualified to do this job, therefore pray to Krishna to give you qualification. It wasn't you're fired, it was be the instrument. And then if you pray, knowing you're not qualified, then you're qualified to get the Shakti. So knowing you're not qualified, pray to Krishna, I'm not qualified, please give me the qualification. That's what Prabhupada said, then you'll be successful. Simple, right? I'm not qualified, Krishna, please give me the qualification. That's qualification for praying for the qualification, is to realize I'm not qualified. That's where it starts. And then you become empowered. And then when you become empowered in that way, you'll always understand that was Krishna's empowerment. Right? So don't be afraid to do something that's difficult. Don't be afraid to make plans that are difficult. But feel, Krishna, I would like to do this, but I'm not qualified. But if you're kind enough to empower me, then maybe we can do this. Maybe we can make it happen. You know, I think one thing a lot of devotees may not understand, but when Prabhupada came to America, he had a very big vision. It wasn't like, well, we'll make a few hippies into devotees and we'll publish my books and then I'll just go back to Vrindavan. It wasn't like that. He was going for the jugular vein of materialistic society. He was going for the heart with his knife of bhakti. Although it seems like a bunch of people just chanting and dancing is a very simple thing, very blissful, in his mind, he was thinking, tear down the pillars of materialistic civilization. And so, you don't see that so much in the beginning, but when he starts to talk about Varnashram, then we're talking about on a massive scale, spreading Krishna consciousness. But what Brahmananda told us in the beginning, when Prabhupada came to America, he wanted to meet Carnegie, Rockefeller. He wanted to meet the movers and shakers, so to speak. That's what he wanted to go right there and said, this can save the world. So Prabhupada was thinking revolution, change the world. Krishna consciousness is the only system, social system, varnashram, and only philosophy that can do that. That's how he was thinking. So when we were young devotees, we understood that very clearly. And that's why we did so much. Because we were in this mood of, we're going right to the heart of materialistic civilization and tearing it down. It's not that we're just establishing temples and distributing books. We're tearing down the foundation of materialistic civilization. That's what we were thinking when we were on the streets. That's why we were so inspired. We saw we were part of a revolution, and it was happening. 1 year, 5 temples, next year 10, next year 20, next year 40, next year 80. 1 year, 10 devotees in the temple, next year 20, next year 30. We saw this happening in front of our eyes. So if you have that mood and mission, it changes your vision, because it's not just we're just trying to establish a temple. That's just something we're doing within a mission of why we're doing it. We're doing it to reform society. At least that's how Prabhupada was thinking. And if you look at his morning walks and he's talking about science, he's attacking the gurus of society. He's pulling them down. He's said, form the Bhaktivedanta Institute and pull down the gurus of society. And you become the gurus. You become the ones that people listen to. So that's so it's very important that we were in that same mood that Prabhupada was in. That we may be doing a little service, but it's part of a mission that's meant to tear down materialistic civilization. It may be a few of us here and a few people coming to our temple, but within our mind, we think we're laying seeds. That, we're laying landmines everywhere in the form of books. They're going to explode and blow up material society. That's the way Prabhupada said it. Sometimes we say time bombs. Landmines, landmine. One day somebody opens the book and it explodes. You finally stepped on it. And Prabhupada saw that. He could see the future. And he was depending on us to be pure enough to carry out that mission, but also have the boldness and the vision to do what he was trying to do, to create this revolution in consciousness, a revolution in the impious lives of misdirected civilization. That we are the Brahmins, we were meant to be leaders, we're meant to guide. Look at the world today, look at the corporate world. It is so corrupt. Why? Because there's no Brahmins directing it. Vaishyas are meant to do what? Grow food, protect cows, and with excess they do banking and money. They're not meant to start big companies and investments and speculation and stock exchange. That would have never happened if Brahmins were controlling society. It's just a means for a small class of people to become extremely wealthy, and then by which they can control all of society with their wealth. The Brahmins were controllers. And the only people who are allowed to control are the ones that have no desire to control, have no desire for wealth, have no desire to control people. They're the only ones you can trust to control, right? That's Brahmins. Because if somebody is motivated by power and money, they can't control, because they can't have people's interest in mind. They can only think of taking advantage. So that's what's going on. So Prabhupada wanted us to be the Brahmins who would guide and give the brain back to society, because it's gone haywire. Right? Just like if we knew the problems that Facebook or mobile devices would cause, as Brahmins, we would have never allowed them to be produced, because we would control the Vaishyas and say, no, you can't produce this. This will destroy society. That's how Brahmins would work. Nobody could produce any product without our approval. Or when we saw that it was detrimental, we'd say, okay, close Facebook down. It's not helping people, it's hurting. It's ruining communications, We would have, phones that automatically turn off after an hour. You get an hour a day, that's it, we would do, as Brahmins, we would do things like that. We could. So that's, in an ideal society, that's what we'd be doing. Right? So, It's very empowering when you understand Prabhupada's vision, how big and broad it was, and then think, okay, I'm a little screw, a little cog in the wheel. What can I do? If Krishna empowers me, I could do amazing things, and it's no longer about me. So, we all have self-identity. This is who I am. These are my limitations. This is what I'm good at. And those things are important, but at the same time, we don't want to limit ourselves to those definitions of our identity, because it's not true. When you have Krishna Shakti, then you can do so many things, isn't it? You can be 6 months in the movement and become a temple president. One time Prabhupada said, I want all of you to open temples. And Rukmini said, what about the ladies? You want the ladies? Prabhupada said, yes, also. So what to speak of the men who were young, they were also doubted. And then Prabhupada said, also women. I said, what place is that? A woman go out and start a temple? Is that Varnashram? No, but Prabhupada said, yes, do it. Amazing. So we can stop here. Any questions, comments? Yes?
You were sharing in the beginning how devotees didn't knew so much, like coming like 6 months or 1 year into the movement, and they're giving Bhagavatam class in the morning. So in terms of Rasik Katha, there was nothing like that. However, when people came, they became so inspired by the feelings of the devotees, and that you described the feeling as love towards Srila Prabhupada.
Yes.
So how can we instill that love in our hearts?
Oh, now? Or maybe we could rephrase the question and said, is it different now? Is something missing now? I think it goes back to love of Guru, or even today, our love for Prabhupada, our connection. The more you understand the greatness of Prabhupada and his mission and what he's trying to do, the more inspired you'll get to want to please him and satisfy him and get Krishna. Because Prabhupada came to get Krishna consciousness. You know Prabhupada's real mission? I found it in a letter, 1959. I was trying to understand, did Prabhupada ever state explicitly, aside from those 7 purposes of ISKCON, his personal mission? And I found it in a letter he wrote to a friend or a political leader. He said, my mission is to make every living entity, bring Krishna consciousness to every living entity. That's quite a mission, huh? He might have said every man, woman, and child, or he might have said every living entity, but in either case, it's a big mission. So to connect with that, and then to want to satisfy Prabhupada's desire, to bring it to every living entity, and to do whatever is necessary, and to make the sacrifices required to do that. That's the empowerment. That's the formula for empowerment. I think perhaps what's maybe missing today that wasn't missing then is that really the depth of understanding of what Prabhupada was doing. Of course, we saw Prabhupada doing it, and we had this example of someone who's going non-stop. So that was very empowering. Prabhupada was always 2 steps ahead of us. Whatever we were doing, he had another program. Now do this, now do that. Or just upgrade what you're doing. He was always upgrading us. Double it, do more temples, more this. Increase it. That was his mood. So if you understand it more deeply, his mission, you'll be more inspired, because there's no mission like it. And so often I think, especially what disturbs me or concerns me, is when devotees lose the sense of mission, then my first thought is, well, who's going to save the world? If you give up and I give up, or we slacken off, or we put in 50% effort instead of 100, then who's going to do it? And if we're putting in 50% effort, then when people come, they think the standard is 50% effort, because that's what we're all doing. And people only understand by association. And as I said, when we joined, the atmosphere was so intensely inspiring, and there was so much surrender that anyone who joined, immediately, the first day, you just join and you're on Harinam Sankirtan from 10 in the morning till 6 in the evening. or 11 to 6, and then sometimes you go back out from 8 till midnight. And so you just did that because that was normal. That's what everybody did. Yes?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And what you're saying is very true, because when I joined, Prabhupada had just left. And I didn't even know. And the energy was there, still there.
Yes.
And the very first day, I met devotees, Neha and VIP. You know VIP?
Vyapi?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
Neha, VIP, and Brahmananda.
Ah.
And VIP told me, I was in suit and this and going to work. Can you help me load the small diary shoe, with books? And I did. The next day, I had left my work and I was a devotee.
Jai, Hari Bol.
Yeah. Next day, I never looked back. And I've been with Brahmananda, just like you saying. He says, go and preach. I said, what do I know? Go and preach. I took the books out, went and I was preaching, and people were like, and sometimes I would be wondering, I would say something and I said, this is speculation. But then, interesting enough, and it happened to me so many times, I'll come back home, I'll open the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, and whatever I have said and told the people, and I said I'm speculating, it's right there. And
Haribol, that proves the point.
It did. And so whatever you're saying is true. We are not qualified.
Yes.
We are being used as instruments.
Yes.
And if you let yourself to be used as an instrument, a vessel, you'll be filled up. And right now, just as you're saying, many of us think, oh, we are now the vessels ourselves. No, we are the ones doing it. We can't do it. Just when we become the instrument, we were allowed. And I remember very well moving from city to city, town to town in West Africa and so forth, opening temples. Sometimes being beaten, being imprisoned. But all these things did happen. And I'm very grateful that you bring it up.
I was, I think one of the greatest ecstasies for me is just what you said, that you say something and later you read that realization you had, you read it, and it's practically explained word for word as you explained it. And that's coming from an exalted sadhu who's explaining this is the point, and you realized it. And which shows, like Gorkishore Das Babaji, being illiterate but understanding Siddhanta. So that's so faith-building, that if you're sincere, Krishna will guide you. He'll explain to you what's in the books. And then you read it, and it's just it's an amazing experience. Especially if your realization is very deep, and it's explained by some great acharya exactly the way you understood it. So thank you, Krishna. That even I'm not very advanced, I can explain Siddhanta.
That gives you inspiration, more impetus to go ahead.
Yeah, so much faith. Yes?
Thank you, Prabhu. This might be a big can of worms to open up.
Okay. It'll keep everyone awake at least. Attention, attention. A controversial question is now being asked. It's time to wake up.
The effort that was put out in the early days, we were having this discussion 2 nights ago.
Yes.
And I've been speaking like this, and it sounds nice, but I find myself even doubting the characterization at times that when Prabhupada began the movement, it was the beginning of something, and it was in the mode of passion.
Yes.
And you do things in the mode of passion a certain way, and to maintain something, you do things in the mode of goodness, and that looks a different way.
Yes.
Although the effort should always be 100%, as you said earlier, does the activity activity look the same now as it did 50
Is it
years?
is it better now? Are you saying, is it
No,
like more sattvic now? Or
What
should it be?
What I'm wondering is the effort, to begin something versus maintain something, you do it differently.
Yes.
So should the activity look different now, or should we strive to still be going out on books and Sankirtan 8 hours a day and opening temples?
I think maybe one of the differences was that we were establishing foundations upon which nothing else could happen if we didn't have those. So in that sense, there was an urgency. But I think the main difference now is we have years of experience of learning what to do, and we have a bigger society, so we have other concerns. So we have to deal with those other concerns. When I was temple president, there were 4 men, 3 men plus myself. So what were we concerned about was just going out all day. There were no women, there were no children. It was very easy to run. So obviously, as our society grew, then there were concerns: how would the children be educated? How would the grihastas stay grihastas and have good marriages? Where was the stability? How would they maintain? So all these other concerns came, which are more of our concerns now. But the pendulum effect is there, that if you say, well, we lack this in those days, we neglected it, and now we suffer, so let's put all our energy into this. And then the other side, which is the social foundations and so forth, which is extremely important. But then if we do that at the neglect of the other, that's a mistake. When Brahmananda was in San Diego, we took him to the restaurant. And after he ate, right at the doorway, there was a refrigerator or cooler with drinks. So someone said, would you like an orange drink or a root beer? He said, I'll take both. And he said, there are occasions when he'd ask Prabhupada, should I do this or should I do that? And Prabhupada said, well, do both. So, and particularly for brahmacharis or single men, traveling and preaching is ideal for many reasons. Because they can do it, they have no other responsibilities, and it's incredible training. So if we look back in retrospect, we see that's what kind of... See what happened, a lot of what happened was we did things wrong. And then when we did things wrong, we just kind of stopped doing them. Okay, I don't know if you know this, but it's kind of funny. We had competition in temples to make devotees. And there was a scoring system. And if somebody stayed over for 3 nights, you'd get a certain amount of points. If he stayed in the temple for like 3 weeks, you'd get, if he shaved up, it was actually called Sika points. And a lot of us thought this is like a little too far, but a lot of devotees thought, oh, this is great, because competition creates enthusiasm and more effort is put out because we want to win the competition. So then, you would just preach to anybody, well, why don't you just stay over? Anyway, you look better with a haircut. So then you could write down, I got a Sika point, although he would leave, a week later. It was like kind of crazy. So after Prabhupada left, at a certain point, maybe like the mid-'80s, there was this reflection on the degradation of competition, how it created friction between temples, whether it was for books or bhaktas or whatever, and this whole bhakta program forcing people to join rather than cultivating people through knowledge and letting them make the decisions. So then the pendulum swung the other way, and a lot of those programs just kind of like, people just like stopped, they stopped doing it. Instead of doing it right, they just stopped it. And then at a certain point in our movement, we realized there's this huge void because nobody's distributing books and nobody's joining, and nobody joins, nobody's going to distribute books. And there was this kind of, don't distribute books because we're doing it the wrong way. So kind of like, just, I don't know what, give them out and get money somewhere. There was all kinds of things. So I think it was just a lack of balance. And I think everyone now realizes that that enthusiasm just needed to be tempered, but at a certain point, mid-'80s or something, we lost it completely. And that was a real that's where the movement kind of crashed. You didn't have these rough, tough brahmacharis willing to do this sacrifice. Well, so many brahmacharis did it, and then they ended up getting married or they fell down, so, that's not the way to go. Or, well, we just did it wrong. That's why they had problems. And then intelligent devotees in the 90s started understanding, well, now let's do it this way. We should distribute books this way. We should, they should go to India, get educated, do Bhakti Shastri, have a foundation. We don't just push them 10 hours a day and 2 minutes of reading, things like that. So my personal realization in these kinds of questions, when they come up, the answer is always about balance. It's not about giving up. It's not about one side or the other. It's about balance, and it's about quality. You did it wrong. So just because you did it wrong doesn't mean you stop doing it. And I think a lot of people just didn't know the right way, so they just said, well, we did it wrong, so stop it. There's a temple now, they do not want anyone to live in it. They don't want brahmacharis. Because such bad experience with brahmacharis, they said, we will not have a brahmachari ashram. Grihastas are responsible, brahmacharis are lazy. They create a bad atmosphere around the temple. So many of them become, they fall down with women. We don't want this reputation. So, that's the swinging of the pendulum. And then that temple without brahmacharis, it's not, doesn't have the life. Life from Shakti and energy, There's no, few people at the morning program and, who live around there, who don't have to work till later or are retired. It's not. So, that idea of, also I think, we may have been young and passionate, but young people are passionate, and they always will be. But it's not the mode of passion. We may be passionately spreading Krishna consciousness. Maybe some tinge of the mode of passion, but technically speaking, mode of passion it's lust. And we weren't lusty. We were just passionately. Maybe we could have distributed books in a more sattvic way, but it wasn't technically the mode of passion per se. If we were rising early, chanting our rounds, following the principles, we're not in the mode of passion. Maybe passionately distributing.
It's enthusiasm.
Yeah. Maybe too much sometimes, but uncontrolled enthusiasm. Enthusiasm without intelligence. But in a lot of places we feel the lack of that's missing. You can just walk in a temple and feel, where is that element of enthusiasm for preaching, of people dedicating themselves? That when you go to temples that have it, it feels like this is exactly what Prabhupada wants. And when you go into temples that don't have it, you always question, what's the future? If you don't have facility for young people to get trained. Now, one of the things that some temples do is, when men become brahmacharis, they'll talk to them. Well, how long do you want to do this? Because brahmachari means student. So, do you want to do this? Why don't we just say, let's try this for 2 years, and after 2 years evaluate it. Whereas the old paradigm was, do it for life. And then, you're hanging on for dear life on a thin thread, along with the other brahmacharis, to make it as a brahmachari long after you should have been married. Now, some will naturally be brahmacharis, they won't be hanging on by a thread, that's just natural for them. So that was artificial, and so people say, no, the brahmachari ashram's bad because it's created bad husbands, it's created men who are going nutty. And then in Mayapur, Bhaktivedanta Purna Swami, he trains his brahmacharis in grihastha life. And then someone will say, how can you train brahmacharis in grihastha life? That doesn't make any sense. You should train them in brahmachari ashram. And he trains them to be grihasthas so that the brahmacharis will know what grihastha life is. And then they can, number one, make a choice. And number two, if they make the choice to get married, they know what it entails, and they're trained to do it. And also trained, they could counsel, because they know, those brahmacharis know more about grihastha life than most grihasthas know, because they were trained in the psychology of male-female interaction. And they can be very good counselors. But when you understand female psychology, if you're a man, and you understand male psychology if you're a woman, it helps you better determine whether you're able to deal with it. Because if you understand it really well, you might think as a man, I don't know if I could be a good husband. I don't know if I could actually give the woman what she needs. Now I know what she needs. I don't know if I'm capable. A lot of men find that out after they get married. That actually I'm not really capable of being a husband. Better they find out before. So that's an example of how to take something and balance it and give it a better foundation. And then, yes, all these young men should have the opportunity to be brahmacharis. It's not that there's this nice college student, he just graduated. We don't want to say be a brahmachari because it'll ruin your future. Say, why don't you do it for 2 years? And then in 2 years, let's discuss your future. What do you want to do? Do you want to stay a monk? Do you want to enter the workforce? And if you want to enter the workforce, how are you going to do that? And what does it mean to be a grihasta? One of the things that I see that, I don't know if it's a problem, but it's something we have to deal with. When we became devotees in the early days, 90% plus devotees either moved into a temple or moved next to a temple. And when they were grihastas, they weren't working. They were full-time devotees. And they lived kind of like you're living. They had a room or a small apartment and supported by the temple. They did book distribution to support themselves. So everybody was trained in the ashram. Now you have the majority of devotees coming who come as grihastas already, and they don't have that ashram experience. And some of those people eventually become temple presidents. And they're on a different frequency than the people who grew up living in the temples, because I travel a lot and I see that. And the people living outside now who grew up in the temples, they have difficulty with the way temples are managed because those people never lived in the temple. And so they don't exactly have the same mood and the understanding or even just the practical knowledge. So that's another phase of what might create this dynamic of what's missing. So I think what you say is true. We did it wrongly, but if we stop it, then it's missing and it's out of balance. You need the grihastas outside. It's not that we don't want people to come, but one of the programs I developed, which you can consider doing, is to have we call it a sadhana retreat, where periodically we go out somewhere, or you could even be, I don't know, even living in the temple in Detroit. You go somewhere where you can all live together, and not Detroit, okay. You go somewhere, in one of those bedrooms you could have 50 people, You go somewhere and you have a full morning program. Everybody rises. You do 3-4 days holiday weekend, you do it periodically. So the people who never live in the temple get the experience of a temple. So you get a retreat center, you turn it into a temple, you do the morning program, you clean everything up, you go out on Harinam, you have extra classes, the evening program. So for 2-3 days, people get an experience of living in a temple, which they didn't get, So, and we did it. The first time we did it, people said, actually, I've never been to Mangalartik in my life. So that's the problem of living outside. And I live with devotees when I travel, and I see, initiated devotees who are always living outside, never in a temple. There's just simple things they don't know. So I think that's a problem for our movement, and especially when those people start to become the leaders due to the lack of any other leadership. They're taking it by default in some cases without that training. That can be problematic because, that mood of Prabhupada may not be there. They may not have... You imbibe that living in a temple and doing the austerity of going out every day and so forth. Yes?
There is another side just to this.
Yes.
Most of the young men in the 70s, 80s are now old. And as you said, we were all brought up in a temple life. And people even to go out to work, it's very difficult for them. And many of these people, as they get older and they become sick or invalid, they don't have any place to go.
Yes.
There's nothing for them, to rely on. The temples, kick them out. They don't have anything to, health-wise, everything.
No
this
insurance.
Is where,
yeah.
many devotees I've been traveling to and talked to, senior, and they are also very concerned about this.
Aside from the obvious concern of the devotees, it creates another problem in that if you're a younger devotee and you see that,
That's it.
then it's like, why, if I remain in the temple, what's going to happen to me? I'll become a brahmachari, then I'm old, and then I can't do anything, and then they throw me out of the temple. Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, devotees are aware of this and they're concerned. And there are some temple presidents who are more conscious of these things to offer support presently while devotees are in good health, to offer them health insurance, to offer them financial support so they can save. And there is, I think now, a building being built, or it's going to soon be built in Mayapur, for the people who've not necessarily a hospice, but people have dedicated their lives to a hospice also. But if you've dedicated your life, now you want to retire, you need a place to stay, then you'll have a place in Mayapur. They'll give it to you. No matter, you may not be able to do a lot of service because of your physical condition, but it's like a retirement home for people who've dedicated their lives to ISKCON. That needs to be developed more, especially if we want to get more of our qualified people engaged in service. A lot of times, we look at what's going on in ISKCON and we say, well, is it society, is it that people are not interested like they were in the 70s, or they're not renounced? Well, obviously people are different, but just because they're different doesn't mean that they won't become devotees or Krishna conscious. But we just don't have the number of preachers that we had. If you turn back the clocks and analyzed how much preaching was going on in 1975, the programs and the numbers of preachers and book distributors, and duplicated that, I'm sure you would get the same or better results today.
Yeah, I think it's better.
Yeah, maybe.
People are in their homes and still, coming.
Yeah.
I see
Yes.
a lot, not in the temples.
Yeah.
So it's like, you stay in your home and you can preach to your friends.
Yes.
You can do it. Yeah, it's still happening. But it is how those who were in it and they are now like in the fourth quarter are being taken care of.
Yeah.
That's the concern.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like Deva Madhava's question, that we weren't thinking of infrastructure in 1970. Something funny that I noticed happened is that if somebody wanted to do a study of the resolutions that the GBC passed over the years in relation to the age of the GBC, you would see a lot of the resolutions are reflecting their challenges, their particular life challenges. Mm-hmm. So you won't see any resolutions about health or hospice until they're all older, because they're going through it now and they're having to deal with it. And it would be, when you have a group of 25-year-olds running a movement to talk about hospice, to talk about health concerns, it'd be very hard to convince them to do that. And they might even say, well, that's just Maya, just depend on Krishna, which is basically what we said. And then you see how, when they're starting to face these challenges, all of a sudden the discussion is about, what do we do about health? And I think it's unfortunate, but it's just something we can learn. Issues about women don't come up really until you have women GBC, like Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj representing minorities, it doesn't come up until there's somebody who has a concern. And that's sad, that we don't, and as we apply that to the future, then what are future concerns that we're not thinking about? Because I may not be ill, or I may not be ready to retire, or I'm not a woman, so I don't think about women's issues, or I'm married or I'm not married, so I don't think about marriage issues, or I'm not worried about sannyasis falling because I'm not, all these things it's just what a mature society deals with, and I think that's just a symptom of maturity, of Brahminical minds mature, who are not just thinking about what their concerns are and how to address it, but I think Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj was very much on the forefront of thinking about the concerns of so many devotees whose concerns were not being met because they weren't in the forefront, or they didn't have a voice. Still, women's issues, it's still a problem. It's not resolved yet. And there may be, issues devotees bring up of like your generation who are basically like Prabhupada disciples, but not Prabhupada disciples, and your position is not the same as a Prabhupada disciple, and things of that, equality issues or issues of respect. So, these are just things where we have to grow into it. And I think also we're accepting a little bit that we're guinea pigs, that we're, the first generation, all the mistakes are made on us. And it's glorious that we're all still here in spite of those mistakes. And anyone who's been in ISKCON for 30, 40 years has gone through some abuse or some unfair treatment, inevitably. And has had to understand why it happened and be tolerant of it and understand the devotees are sincere, but sometimes they make mistakes. And we don't like it. We feel sorry for those who've gone through it. And we want to rectify it. But I think, at least the way I think is, in my sphere of influence, I'll do what I believe is right. And I may not have control of what another temple is doing. But at least in my sphere of influence, let me treat the devotees the way I feel they should be treated and give them the time I think they need and so forth. And I can do it one-on-one. I may not do it on a grand scale, but I can do what I can do. And one of the lessons we learn is when we see that something is done that's not right, that we make a note that I don't want to deal with devotees that way. I see this was wrong. This devotee was neglected. This devotee wasn't listened to. Maybe they weren't fairly dealt with. Let me learn from that not to deal with devotees that way. That's also what we learn from the mistakes. And if we just see the mistakes and then we find fault with them, then we may not learn that lesson ourselves. And sometimes it's the only way you can learn, is to make those mistakes. Someone has to make them so you can see, oh, that's a mistake. I don't want to do that. And you kind of know, maybe I would have done that. But now I see the ramifications of what's going on. And I understand this is wrong, why it's wrong. And now it's an impetus to me not to do it. Many devotees say that what's happening in ISKCON is just to be expected for the level of maturity and advancement we're in. And now we just hope we can do better. Learn from it. I think that's the really biggest fault, is to make the mistake over and over again. That's sad, because then you think, well, is it going to ever get better? We're continually making the same mistakes.
Same mistake.
Yeah, at least we learn from them.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else? Yes.
I have one question. Thank you so much for the lecture and bringing to light the motivation and intention behind Srila Prabhupada's movement. And I have a concern along those lines. Is that because Maya is very strong in the Kali Yuga, even in my family in India, I see like the degradation of Varnashram Dharma. Like my grandfather was the most well-known pujari in the village. My father learned how to be a pujari, but he never got the time or the thought to teach me how to be a pujari. And we used to have cows. Used to have a farm. Now the brothers are fighting over who gets the land, and so there's so many things going on. And that's just one family. I mean, all of India is facing a lot of, and India is, I feel that if in the worst case scenario, if India loses to Varnashram Dharma, it's going to be maybe pockets of ISKCON temples around the world. Maybe it might be more temples, but pockets of ISKCON temples around the world, and it'll give the Mayavadis and people who have control of money a lot of, pride that, hey, we destroyed one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and either, change them to a different religion, or, so how do, I feel a grave concern of protecting India's Varnashram Dharma. And, I am over here, not over there, but I see that, it's deteriorating a lot. but just having that hope that we can change it. We can either wear a suit
Yeah.
or it's really concerning.
I think a lot happens. Well, if you look at change in America, the way a lot of it happens. I mean, I'm not a sociologist, but what I'm observing, you have older generations ruining things, younger generations coming in and growing up, watching them ruin it,
Yes.
and deciding we don't want to follow this. Now, like the hippie generation, that was a reaction to materialism. They were watching their parents who were very materialistic in terms of accumulation, and then saying we don't want to live this way. But they didn't really have an alternative. But now what you're seeing is a lot of younger generation looking at our generation destroying the planet, and then realizing and saying we can't live this way because there's not enough resources. Looking at the obvious chain of consumption, production, and then on the side of that, all the evils that are going along as a byproduct of it, not just with the earth, but socially, the breakdown of the family and so on. And it's usually these younger people who, like a lot of the alternative companies were started by younger people, or people who were hippies who are now older but were always alternative. And then the establishment, they will only do the alternative because it makes money, not for the purpose of it. So they're in a different category. What's the problem you have in India is the younger generation is now copying the materialistic culture of the West. So what I see in India, more of the alternatives are the older people than the younger people. The only younger generation's real alternative is the ones that are joining spiritual movements, But the mass of them are completely materialistic, and so they're not going to be the ones that are going to do anything. And maybe the next generation, because generations, so when your generation goes crazy materially, then maybe their kids will look at it and they'll be like the hippies and go, this is crazy.
I just feel it's a very great risk because India was subjugated to so much external rule and manipulation.
Yeah. Well, if you ask Prabhupada this question, then obviously he would say that you have to spread Krishna consciousness. And that's why he stressed book distribution. But you have something else that's going on, which is of concern to me. And I don't say this as a criticism, it's an observation. That India is a poor country. And while the rest of the world was becoming wealthy in the 70s and so forth, 50s, 60s, America became wealthy in the 50s. India was a poor country. In the 60s it was poor. 70s was poor. It started getting, maybe in the 80s, particularly 90s, it started developing a middle class. And now it's got the greatest, what do they call that? That factor? When you're in production, I forget what, anyway, India is producing more wealth or more jobs or at a greater rate than any country in the world now. So the Indians are excited about that. And as you know, being Indian, being in America, but also in India, this is like opportunity. So when you come to America, it's like, I'm not going to come to America and be a sadhu. This is the land of opportunity for wealth. And now that India is becoming an opportunity for building wealth also, so I can live the way my parents could never live. The problem you have in India, and Indians, even in ISKCON, is that momentum is there. So that even we come to America, we become devotees, that monetary momentum, that financial, to build a nice life and build a nice life for our kids, is extremely strong, much stronger than it is in devotees raised in America, or Western devotees going to India. And and we want to establish Varnashram, we want to establish simple living and so on, and we're not entirely imbibing that in our own lifestyles. And that is also, I don't want to say maybe a problem, maybe it's not a problem individually for that devotee because their family is very Krishna conscious, although they're all professionals, they're working hard, but they're still good devotees. But as an entire society, we might think how people might look at that. Well, if you believe this, why are you so focused on education and economic development when in your books you debunk education and you debunk economic development and you talk about training your children in spiritual values and living simply, and so that's something we have to contend with, because like in many temples, it's mostly Indians who are all very well situated, because the best Indians come here, they get the good education, and if you come this far, you're not going to just renounce it all, right?
That's how it is.
So that's kind of the foundation of where India wants to establish itself. And so how do you establish Varnashram when the momentum is like, I don't want to be like my grandparents, they lived in a little hut. And the first full circle goes around in America where we've had that, and now you have movements who say, I want to live in a hut, because it's, you have, natural medicine instead of allopathic medicine was all the rage in the 1920s, and now half the people don't go to allopathic doctors anymore. So as an American observing this, it's very interesting to watch Indians coming in America and becoming very Americanized when we've come around the circle and we're going back to Ayurveda, to natural living, simplifying, retiring young, or maybe forming a business that can spread Krishna consciousness rather than thinking, well, I've got a degree in this, and in this industry I can make a lot of money, so I'll just do it, even though this industry is producing pharmaceuticals that are actually bad for people, or chemicals that are polluting our environment, but I'll do it because it makes a lot of money. I'm not a criticism, I'm saying that's what I observe in Indians. Whereas us as Americans, when we go to college, we'll have second thoughts about becoming a chemical engineer that's going to produce pesticides that are going to poison people. Whereas I don't see that with Indians. They tell me they do this. In my mind, I don't ask them, why would you work for that company? I already know the answer, because that's what I was trained to do. And then another question, well, why would you get training to do that? Knowing that, well, I wasn't a devotee then. And so now what do I do? And I have a family and all this. But we as Westerners are a little bit around the circle, and as Indians, you're in like the top of the circle now. So that's the challenge. Now the challenge is to get you around the full circle and go, no, the culture that you left is actually good. It's just was applied improperly.
Absolutely.
And
That's the biggest challenge.
there's another interesting phenomena that I find as a Westerner. Like as a Westerner, I'm very aware of the problems in American society and how people are being exploited and cheated in all levels. And if I go into an Indian's home, especially those who are older, let's say 40 plus, all the products they have in their shampoos, their toothpaste, their soaps, their lotions, everything, is all carcinogenic, because that's what the companies produce. That's how they produce their products. The Indians don't know that. They think, well, this is America, and you do this. So if that's one example of just copying a system which is bad and destructive. Go get these jobs. Who's to say in 10 years you can even get employed? Because you think, well, if I graduate university, I'll become wealthy. Statistically, that's not true, but that's what the Indians come thinking. But down the road, like good Indian Vaishyas know that. You have to have your own business if you want to build wealth. There's not job security in America anymore. So many of the IT guys are, you have to travel, you may have to live, who knows, in a little island in the middle of nowhere to find a job now. So as Westerners, we're more aware of that. As Indians, you're more into the system. Just do this, eat this, this is good, go to this school, it's good. And you're sending your kids to schools we would never send our kids to. We go, I'm not going to send my kids. And then your kids end up becoming Americans smoking, drinking, this and that, and you're like, what happened? He said, well, we could have told you that was going to happen. You sent them to this school. So we're on different planes. So that's the problem with India now and Indians. And if any Indians homes I go to that are a little more like Americans, they're younger. They're like in their 20s. They went to school here. They're a little more knowledgeable. They kind of understand it, and they're not so enamored by it. But if they're just off the boat from India, generally not like that. It's like, it's America. This is where I can make it. So that's what we're dealing with. I don't think that I would talk that way in temples and try to change them so much. That will happen naturally as you become Krishna conscious. And as you're working, how many years can you work 13 hours a day and have a half hour to chant japa once you're initiated? At some point you're just going to say, this doesn't work. This, striving for a money thing, it's like, I can't be Krishna conscious. And so I told the Indians, I said, 10, 20 years, I think you won't be able to do it anymore. You'll just want to retire, and you won't want to hand that to your kids because you'll be burned out. You'll realize you ran after the dollar and you sacrificed your sadhana, and your family suffered, your kids suffered, you were always gone. And that simple, if I would have taken a simple 9 to 5 instead of a 7 to 7, and push my kids to do what I do, and now they couldn't become Krishna conscious because they've been in college for 8 years, and working at the same time. They have no time. They'll reflect on that. But we've been through that, so it's not exactly what we want. Okay, why don't we stop here? And say, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Go Premanandi Hari Hari Bol.
Grace Mahatma Prabhu ki